What if one place on Earth quietly refuses to obey the official human timeline? What if the problem isn't a lack of evidence, but an overwhelming amount of it? Why does Australia keep producing dates that just shouldn't exist? And why do these dates trigger such instant resistance instead of sparking curiosity? There's a particular number in the story of human origins that absolutely cannot be crossed. Is this really about science? Or is it about desperately protecting a story that's already starting to crack at the seams? Stay with me, because once you see what Australia has preserved, the entire human timeline starts to feel, well, negotiated. Australia doesn't act like the final stop at the end of a long journey. It feels more like a memory, a continent that remembers far more than it's currently allowed to say. The standard story of human migration is, by design, very clean and tidy. It starts with a single, late exit from Africa. Then, a rapid sweep across the entire world. A neat replacement of all the archaic humans who came before. And holding this whole narrative together is one sacred date, 50,000 years. This number functions less like a scientific measurement and more like a hard border. On one side, you have acceptable, comfortable evidence. On the other side, chaos, disorder. And Australia lives squarely on the wrong side of that line. When archaeologists first started suggesting a human presence in the ancient supercontinent of Sahul, that is Australia and New Guinea earlier than 50,000 years ago, the response from the mainstream wasn't scientific curiosity, it was containment. The dates were immediately questioned, the sediments they were found in were accused of being contaminated. The archaeological layers were declared disturbed by default, as if that was the only possible explanation. The established model didn't bend. The physical evidence itself was put on trial. Now, this isn't entirely unusual behavior in science. It's the classic behavior of a paradigm, a dominant theory that has mistaken its own internal coherence for absolute truth. Because if Australia was occupied 65,000 years ago, or even earlier, then Tefamos, out of Africa burst is no longer a single, triumphant expansion. It becomes something far less cinematic, far more complex. It suggests multiple movements of people, long pauses, even returns. It points to separate local histories forming independently all over the world. In a word, complexity. The site of Maggot B, a rock shelter in northern Australia, is where this tension becomes impossible to ignore. It was carefully and meticulously excavated. The artifacts were dated using a reliable technique called optically stimulated luminescence, and the results pointed consistently, layer after layer, toward human occupation around 65,000 years ago. The response was predictable, an all-out effort to invalidate the date, to question the stratigraphy, the sequence of the layers, to assume displacement, that the artifacts must have moved from a higher, younger layer down into an older one. These critiques were launched not because they were impossible. Archaeology is always complex, but because the alternative was simply intolerable for the established model. To accept the Majubi dates would be to admit the entire 50,000-year framework was wrong. Genetics was then deployed as the ultimate reinforcement for the old story. Genetic models, built on assumed mutation rates and population sizes, were treated as a higher authority than the physical, tangible evidence found in the ground. But genetic timelines aren't perfect clocks. They're stories, constructed from variables, change the assumed length of a generation, and the date of an event moves by thousands of years. Change the assumptions about ancient population structures, and it moves again. Two different teams of geneticists can use the exact same genetic data and produce two entirely different pasts. What genetics actually shows, when you look closely, is not a single, clean exodus. Each shows deep, complex population structures, interbreeding with other hominins like Denisovans, and remarkable stories of survival. Denisovan ancestry, for example, persists in the people of Papua New Guinea, not faintly, but in significant amounts. This points to a much deeper, more complicated history in the region, and the physical evidence of bones themselves refuses to cooperate with the simple story. Early Australian human remains don't form a neat, uniform modern set. They show a wide spectrum of features. You find gracile or more slender forms appearing early in the record, but you also find robust, heavily built forms that persist much later than they should. Some of the ancient skulls found in Australia look nothing like what a tiny group of people, fresh from a late migration, should produce. They suggest continuity. They suggest local consolidation of populations. They suggest long-term survival in isolation, not recent arrival. Lake Mungo, an ancient dry lake bed in New South Wales, only deepens the problem. This wasn't just a simple coastal camp for recent arrivals. This was a sophisticated, inland community. It was a place of ritual, of symbolism. We find evidence of the world's oldest known cremation, careful burials with ochre. We find tradition. These are not the marks of people who just arrived yesterday. To make the 50,000-year model work, you have to believe that modern humans sprinted across the whole of Asia, somehow mastered sophisticated open-water sea crossings, colonized the massive continent of Sahul, spread across its incredibly diverse and challenging environments, and established complex cultural and spiritual systems almost instantly. It's possible, in theory, but it seems incredibly strained in reality. The evidence on the ground just doesn't support such a hurried, simplistic timeline. The deeper issue here is probably psychological. When a scientific hypothesis becomes part of a community's identity, any evidence that challenges it isn't just dated, it becomes a threat. Australia doesn't merely challenge a few dates on a timeline, it challenges the authority of the narrative itself. Because if Aboriginal Australians descend from multiple ancient lineages that were shaped over tens and tens of thousands of years on the continent, then the story is no longer owned by a single scientific institution or a single simple narrative. Hybridization with other ancient peoples becomes unavoidable. Deep time, far beyond 50,000 years, becomes undeniable, and the entire edifice of simplicity collapses. Let's be clear. The resistance to these early dates was never about protecting indigenous history or identity. It was about protecting a schedule, a timetable that made the human story easy to teach in schools, easy to summarize in textbooks, and easy to defend at conferences. Australia breaks that ease. It refuses to be a latecomer. It refuses to be simple, and it refuses to be silent. Once you accept that, the human past stops looking like a linear march forward from a single point. It starts looking like a global conversation, a messy, regional, and profoundly ancient one. Not a single story spreading outward from one source, but many stories meeting, merging, and surviving against all odds. Australia was never the end point. It was a chapter that was written far earlier than the official story allows, and our human timeline has been uncomfortable with that fact ever since. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey into our deep past interesting, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the stories that challenge what we think we know. See you next time.